Guess what, everybody? I like Echoes of Wisdom. It's a breath of fresh air after almost a decade without a traditional Zelda experience. Since its release, every YouTuber under the sun has been discussing the differences between Zelda's old and new entries. Should the games be more linear? Should the world be less open? Should dungeons have items and mini-bosses? I'm gonna come right out of the gate and admit I have nothing original to contribute to that conversation. But I did get a 100% in AP English, so... writing. If there were any statement safer than Breath of the Wild revolutionized the genre, it would probably be pointing out how different the game feels compared to the series' earlier installments. That's just the cost of innovation, right? If the player's given choices, how can the writers account for them and deliver a compelling narrative? Are we honestly expecting every game to be Cyberpunk 2077 with multiple endings, relationship mechanics, and Keanu Reeves? That must be what you're implying, right? How can we control for all those variables? Keanu's busy this weekend. What you're asking for is unrealistic and definitely beyond the scope of our meager small bean company Nintendo. That's the argument I hear most often, anyway. And for a while, I didn't really have a good answer. It's true that stories like Twilight Princess, Skyward Sword, and even Wind Waker wouldn't work if you could play the dungeons in any order you wanted. Reaching Gerudo Desert and discovering the Mirror of Twilight strengthens your bond with Midna. She opens up to you, admits that she was wrong, and most importantly, asks you to work with her as an equal partner, not a pet she's blackmailing to do her bidding. It'd be pretty strange if you could jump right into the Goron mines after that and have her completely change her behavior on you. Or look at the search for Zelda in Skyward Sword. The entire game is centered around reaching her, and once you do, the goal shifts to rescuing her from an eternal stasis. Every detail builds on top of the last. These stories wouldn't work if you could play them out of order. At least not without writing multiple scenarios for every area, which I agree is excessive and unnecessary. With all that said, what's a happy medium? What's a way to deliver solid narratives to the player while maintaining that level of open-world independence Nintendo seems to value above all else? It's simple. Tell smaller stories. Echoes of Wisdom contains multiple rich, interpersonal conflicts between characters that are isolated to individual regions of the map. The Gerudo chief is having trouble trusting her daughter's judgment. The Goron leader is grieving his late father and trying to live up to his legacy. The Yeti is looking for his missing brother and feels like his own behavior is the reason he's lost his entire family. These are deep, powerful nuggets of narrative scattered throughout Hyrule, and most of them have nothing to do with Zelda's own overarching conflict. It's not all Shakespeare. The Deku and Zora plots are definitely on the cuter side, but they really help lighten the mood in an otherwise emotional set of stories. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom also choose to segment their stories into regional episodes, but neither stuck the landing in my opinion. I remember my first playthrough of Breath of the Wild. I headed to Zora's domain first thing, and was charmed by Sidon, captivated by the Mipha flashbacks, and fascinated by the implications of Link growing up surrounded by Zora royalty. When I first saw Mipha's ghost in the Divine Beast, I genuinely shed a tear. Things were going pretty well, and I had an unwavering faith in Zelda's storytelling. Then I went to Rito Village, met the champion's descendant, helped them access the Divine Beast, met the champion's ghost, and yeah. Breath of the Wild's biggest flaw is definitely how formulaic the writing feels. Every area tells the same story, just with names and motifs swapped out. I'm not saying they're objectively bad or anything. Mipha's story brought me to tears, but it's just not as impactful the second time. Or the fourth. I know the champions are all dead, but I couldn't help feeling like none of this actually mattered. A friend of mine described Breath of the Wild's story like hearing about last night's crazy party for hours the next day. It sure sounds cool, but I'm not at that party. Interesting things need to be happening in the present. Did Tears of the Kingdom solve that issue? Well, only on a temporal technicality. If Zelda's actions are considered to be in the present, then yeah, all the interesting stuff is happening in the present. In practice, though, it's still a story about a dozen or so dead people who Link can't touch or help in any meaningful way. The endless pursuit of an unreachable Zelda is definitely driven home harder in this one, and I will say the Light Dragon reveal did genuinely twist my gut the first time around. But the underlying problems are still alive and well in the sequel, if not a bit worse. After beating each dungeon, you're greeted with the sage's ancestor telling the story of the Sealing War, something that sounded really cool on paper, but begins to read more like a homework assignment by its 5th rendition. I'm not sure who made the decision to show the same scene 5 times, but they should probably have to take Creative Writing 101 before they get to touch another script. My jaw actually dropped when I beat my 2nd dungeon in Tears of the Kingdom and realized it was the exact same dialogue and events from the previous story, just spoken by the applicable sage and showing their expressionless mask for 30 seconds. I know this game started as a DLC, but where the hell did the budget go? You can't just show the same cutscene 4 times, then show it a 5th time with Minoru to actually show how it ends. It doesn't work like that. Echoes of Wisdom still has the formulaic formalities, but they're over in seconds. The final 3 dungeons have brief chats with their respective goddesses that aren't anything to write home about, but the regional stories themselves are leaps and bounds beyond anything Tears of the Wild brought to the table. I think Tulin's story is a perfect example of this. He doesn't feel respected by his tribe and knows his abilities vastly exceed their expectations. He's beginning to awaken the power of the Wind Sage, and it's causing friction with his father. We helped his dad battle a divine beast in the last game, and it's safe to say he respects our abilities. All of the elements for a compelling story are here, but the game just gives up on it. We help Tulin recover his bow after he bit off more monsters than he could chew. Then he miraculously decides he should rely on others and work as a team. After that, some guy tells him the village respects and believes him. Not his father, the character from the last scene who knows and respects Link, but this dude named Hearth flies in to give Tulin a message from his father. You know who told me that? Your old dad, Teba. Did he? Did he now? The game of telephone really isn't necessary, guys. Teba should have just flown in himself, told Tulin he saw the battle, and entrusted Link with his protection. Why are we doing emotional resolution by proxy when Teba was already on set? Is this actor in a union? That was a joke. Teba is a video game. The family conflicts in Echoes of Wisdom feel much more real and pay off in spades compared to Tulin's heartwarming messenger pigeon. The Goron leader Darstan lost his dad shortly before the game. His father entrusted him with a list of rules to be a great leader, which he keeps on him at all times. Whenever he's presented with a challenge, he consults the list and agonizes over the right decision. All of this culminates in a touching moment where the only way he can help his people is to break the slab, cementing himself as the living chief of the Gorons and leaving his father to rest in peace. It's heartwarming and tragic in all the right ways. We spent time with this character. We saw him grapple with these emotions, and it was all the more satisfying when he finally overcame them. And Echoes of Wisdom has like 3 subplots of this quality. What's the mainline team's excuse when a third-party Grezzo game is getting it right? I feel like a 9th grade English teacher right now, but there's this thing called show, don't tell. It's usually best to show the reader something instead of simply telling them it's the case. Tears of the Kingdom tells us Tulin's a wayward youth struggling with authority. Then we're quite literally told by Hearth that Teba suddenly trusts and believes in him. What changed between these 2 scenes? The characters haven't interacted since. We're simply told things are different now. Darstan doesn't tell us he's an inexperienced chief grieving his father. Echoes of Wisdom shows his people asking him tough questions and shows him failing to answer them. He flees the scene, forcing Zelda to chase after him and see what's wrong. It would have been so easy to have some optional Goron with some dialogue about how Darstan's trying to live up to his old man. But the game cares enough to go the extra mile and show you Darstan's pain. That makes the resolution satisfying. Am I making sense here? This really doesn't seem that complicated. This feels a little negative for my taste, so I want to take a minute to remind you we're all on the same team here. I like Tears of the Kingdom. It's one of my favorite games of all time. You're allowed to love these games despite their issues. Hell, you're allowed to love the stories of these games and disagree with me that there are any issues. This is all subjective. But I do want to address one last point before we close things out. Anytime I bring up the lackluster stories in Breath of the Kingdom, the smartest gamer in the room is always quick to chime in with the same old response. The story doesn't have to be good, Snappy. And I mean, sure. If you want to give a free pass to a multi-billion-dollar company and say something about their product is allowed to be lacking, that's definitely an opinion. But my counter-argument is pretty simple, actually. Why do they spend so much time and money on it? Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom both have vast, grand stories with dozens of animated cutscenes, full voice acting, orchestral accompaniment, and viral marketing campaigns ready to tell you how this is the biggest, baddest, epic adventure for Link and friends. If you're trying to argue that Zelda Team doesn't care about story, I don't know what game you've been playing. Story is absolutely everywhere in the open world games. It's just not very good. Ironically, it's the worst of both worlds. Players who couldn't care less about story are still forced to sit through unskippable cutscenes and shaky voice performances, but those of us who want to be invested in the narrative aren't exactly satisfied either. This is gonna sound crazy coming from such a story-focused gamer, but I genuinely prefer they didn't bother if this is the best they can do. Just go back to "It's dangerous to go alone" and give us cool stuff to explore. But if you're gonna spend millions on all the bells and whistles, why not pay a single decent writer a modest salary to whip your script into shape before it hits the animation desk? If you're going to tell an epic, a legend, why wouldn't you take the extra time to make sure it's tight and satisfying? You can't say they don't care about the game's story. They just aren't telling a good story, and that's what's so confusing about all this. They're one of the biggest companies in the industry. Their games don't even have deadlines anymore. They're basically printing free money and don't know what to do with it. So what esoteric limitation is causing the writing to be this lacking? Who's too big to admit they need help? Who isn't doing right by their team in hiring a qualified story director? You've got the capital backing of Nintendo, and the best you can do is "your dad told me he's really proud" tool in? It's not like it takes much either. Conde is a character we spend 10 minutes with in Echoes of Wisdom, but he's everyone's favorite, and I would die for him in real life. His brother left a long time ago, and in his absence, their father died. Conde buried their dad and has been waiting for his brother to return every day. Once again, we see him grieving. We watch as he buries himself in chores, thinking his brother isn't coming home because he's been a bad kid. This didn't need a huge budget. Conde doesn't even have a mouth. It isn't hard to make your audience feel something. You just can't tell them they feel it. Thanks for indulging me while I talk through some complicated thoughts about the Zelda franchise. If there's enough interest, I definitely consider writing some deep dives on the individual arcs in Echoes of Wisdom, or some other things I love from Zelda games. I also want to say one more time for the people in the back, I do not hate the open world games. They're masterpieces and don't need defended by anyone. It's totally valid if you enjoyed these stories. I just want these games to be better, and I want Zelda to learn from its mistakes so we can get more regional narratives like Echoes of Wisdom and fewer regional phenomena. That's a quest from Tears of the Kingdom.